Now, ministers were warned by their own advisers that cutting the UK's foreign aid budget means thousands of women in Africa will die in pregnancy and childbirth, among other severe consequences around the world. So let's take a closer look. This is an excerpt from the Foreign Office's own assessment, now made public, laying bare the scale of UK foreign aid cuts for individual countries and aid programmes. So aid for poorer countries to reduce carbon emissions, for example, is cut 49%. Aid for helping girls to read and write is cut 54%. Now let's turn to Africa and South Sudan. And in this Foreign Office document, ministers were warned by their own officials that UK aid cuts mean malnutrition cases will go untreated, which could lead to over 3,000 children dying in that country. In Somalia, the cuts mean the Foreign Office will delay or potentially stop altogether a programme to prevent female genital mutilation there, where 9 in 10 girls on average undergo FGM. And across Africa, cutting aid for women's sexual health will mean around 185,000 more women face unsafe abortions, and around 1,500 more women will die in pregnancy, according to this Foreign Office document. So why the cuts? Well, the government cut our international aid budget from 0.7% of gross national income to 0.5% in 2021. At the same time, a lot of our foreign aid budget is also being spent not abroad, but here in the UK on supporting asylum seekers and refugees, not least from Afghanistan and Ukraine. Now, the Foreign Office says that while the budget for low-income countries has had to be reduced in the short term to achieve its savings target, it's due, it says, to nearly double for these countries the year after. And they say aid spending will increase next year and will focus on protecting the world's most vulnerable while delivering value for money. Well, joining me now is Labour MP Sarah Champion, who chairs the International Development Committee in the Commons, which scrutinises UK aid funding, and from the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, Rama Hansraj, Save the Children's Country Director for Yemen. Rama, to you first of all, I mean, you're living there with a long-standing, devastating war. The Foreign Office has spelled out some of the impact of these cuts. Will you see the effect of them there?
Yes, Yemen has been impacted by war since 2015, and this has resulted in significant humanitarian crisis with almost 11 million children in need of humanitarian assistance. Children face high level of malnutrition, security and protection risks, and girls are particularly vulnerable. This cut from the previous years, especially in 2019, the UK contributed to almost 221 million GBP, which has fallen to 83 million in 2023. So this significant cut has a huge impact on children and families in Yemen. You'll see that since the war started, almost 50% of health clinics in Yemen are dysfunctional. Last week, I was in Hudaida and met a mother who brought her 8-month-old child with acute respiratory infection to the health clinic. And, because the medication was not available, she had to rush the child to a nearby hospital, but the child passed away. This could have been totally avoided if there was a functional health system in Yemen and funding was adequate to keep them running,
And let's bring in Sarah Champion, who's the chair of the International Development Committee. I mean, we've had this long list provided by the Foreign Office itself, which shows devastating human suffering, basically, because of these cuts. But we are still, aren't we, the UK, among the biggest donors of humanitarian aid overseas?
We are, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And it's a real sort of asset to this country that we are seen through our foreign aid as a country that does the right thing, the moral thing, that sticks to the law. But unfortunately, in the last 3 years, that reputation and the actual cash that we're giving has been hacked away at for, I'm sad to say, political reasons. And our international reputation has suffered. But what this document shows very, very clearly is the people on the ground, the people that are going to die because of these choices that have been made. I mean, the only good thing I can say about the report is the minister actually gave it to my committee. Last year, I had to publish it under parliamentary privilege.
And Sarah Champion, the The Foreign Office says that the aid budget overall will increase next year. The aid for the very poorest countries will nearly double. And the Conservative policy is to return to 0.7% of gross national income spent on overseas aid as soon as possible, isn't it? And how is that different to what Labour are proposing?
Well, I welcome the commitment to increase the budget next year, but you have to remember that 3 years ago, the budget was cut by a third. We're now looking at between, as you said in your report, about a quarter of the remaining budget being spent in the UK on refugees, which no other G7 does. So a slight increase next year is great. But what I'm urging the government to do, and this document but written by the civil servants is urging, is that the money that is available next year goes to the very poorest, the most marginalised, the women and girls, the people with disabilities, because what this report shows is that's just not happening.
And just before we do go back to Yemen, I would like to know how the Labour policy is different to the current Conservative government policy on overseas aid spending, because it's not, is it?
I think that the priorities are the key for Labour. So what we're looking at
not the numbers?
Making sure that the money goes to the very poorest in the world, the lowest income and the most marginalised in the world. So yes, obviously there is a cost, and yes, all political parties are committed to returning to the 0.7. But also I would like a situation where we actually say, okay, we are going to alleviate poverty. We're going to prevent global health pandemics. That's what we should be focusing on.
Okay, and Rama, to your work in Yemen, I mean, the government today is talking about value for money. Do they get value for money for the aid money that's spent in Yemen in the midst of this horrendous war?
Absolutely. Yemen has seen this brutal war, and, children and families here have been incredibly resilient in the midst of conflict, hunger, and disease. The needs are huge. We understand, but, child is a child, no matter where they are born. And I think the contribution from the UK government has definitely contributed to saving lives, and they're saving lives every single day. And another child's life saved is always worthwhile,
And from where you are, what does a story like this do for the UK's international image and reputation?
I think it's, we are really glad that there has been a slight increase in the funding allocation. But I think at this moment, pulling out or, a drastic reduction from where it was in 2019, it definitely has a huge, reputational, damage to the UK government. So our really request the UK government not only to fund the humanitarian response in Yemen, but also work to help end the conflict in the country.
Yeah. Well, Sarah Champion and Rama Hansraj, thank you so much for speaking to us.